The hum of the jet engine was a familiar lullaby to Henry Dubois. But the storm wasn't in the skies. It was brewing in the pressurized cabin of Aerovista Flight 723. Dressed in a simple, well-worn black tracksuit, he was invisible, just another passenger. No one would guess that beneath the comfortable cotton was a man whose palate was insured for $10 million, a chef, whose name was whispered with reverence in the world's most exclusive kitchens. But in that moment, none of it mattered. He was just a black man being told no, and the woman telling him had no idea that she wasn't just refusing him a meal. She was gambling with her family's entire future. The air in the first-class cabin of Aerovista Flight 723 from Paris to New York was chilled and tasted faintly of lemon-scented disinfectant. For Henry Dubois, it was the smell of anonymity, a welcome respite from the high-stakes pressure cooker of his life. For the past 2 weeks, he had been on a whirlwind tour of Europe's 3 Michelin star restaurants, a trip that was part research, part pilgrimage, and all-consuming. Now all he craved was the quiet embrace of his New Orleans home. He settled his large frame into the plush leather of seat 2A. At 42, Henry carried himself with a quiet gravity. His hands, which could plate a dish with the delicacy of a watchmaker, were broad and calloused. He wore no jewelry, save for a simple, worn leather band on his right wrist, a gift from his late grandmother, the woman who had first put a whisk in his hand in her bustling Creole kitchen. He had pre-ordered his meal as he always did. It was a necessity, not a luxury. A severe allergy to certain synthetic preservatives, particularly sodium benzoate, meant that standard airline fare was a game of Russian roulette he was unwilling to play. His request was always the same: a simple grilled chicken breast with steamed vegetables and a plain baked potato. No sauces, no butter, no surprises. It was the culinary equivalent of beige, but it was safe. The lead flight attendant, a woman in her late 40s with sharp features and hair pulled back into a severe bun, moved through the cabin with an air of weary authority. Her name tag read Brenda. She dispensed pre-departure champagne with a tight, practiced smile that didn't reach her tired eyes. When she got to Henry, her smile faltered for a fraction of a second as she took in his casual attire, a stark contrast to the tailored suits and designer dresses around him. Champagne, she asked, her tone clipped. Just water for now, thank you. Henry replied, his voice a low, smooth baritone that seemed at odds with his unassuming appearance. Brenda nodded curtly and moved on. Henry paid it no mind. He'd learned long ago that the world judged books by their covers, and his cover was often misread. He wasn't offended. It was simply a data point, an observation of the human condition. An hour into the flight, the meal service began. The scent of reheated bread and rich sauces filled the cabin. Henry watched as the passenger across the aisle was served a glistening fillet of salmon with asparagus. He waited patiently. Brenda arrived at his row, pushing the heavy cart. She didn't make eye contact. "Sir, your meal choice for today is the beef bourguignon or the pan-seared cod." She stated, her voice flat. "Actually," Henry said gently, "I have a special meal order. Dubois. D-U-B-O-I-S. Brenda tapped at the tablet mounted on her cart, her manicured nail making sharp little clicks. She sighed, a sound of profound annoyance. "I'm not seeing a special order under that name for this seat. Could you please double-check it was confirmed with the airline yesterday? It's a medical dietary requirement." He stressed the word medical, slightly, hoping to convey the seriousness without causing a scene. Another series of taps. Another more theatrical sigh. No. There's nothing here. The manifest is clear. You'll have to choose one of the standard options. This was unusual. His assistant Avery was meticulous. An error of this magnitude was virtually impossible. I understand there might be a system error, Henry said, keeping his voice level. But I cannot eat the standard meals. Could you perhaps see if the galley has a simple piece of fruit, or even just some plain bread? Brenda's patience, already thin, snapped. She finally looked at him, and her eyes held a dismissive glint that he knew all too well. It was the look that said, "You're being difficult." It was the look that questioned his legitimacy, his right to be in this seat making this request. "Sir," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "we are in the middle of a transatlantic flight, not a bespoke restaurant. We have 2 delicious chef-curated options available. The catering for this flight was loaded in Paris. We can't just whip something up. Please make a choice so I can serve the other passengers." A younger flight attendant, whose name tag read Chloe, hovered behind Brenda, a worried expression on her face. She looked at Henry with apologetic eyes. Henry took a slow breath. He was not a man given to anger, but a cold knot was forming in his stomach. It wasn't just about the food. It was about the casual dismissal, the refusal to even try. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this is a health issue. I physically cannot consume your standard meals. My request was logged and confirmed. The error is on the airline's side, but I'm asking for a simple accommodation to avoid a potential medical emergency at 35,000 feet. Brenda's face hardened. "If your condition is that severe, perhaps you should have made more robust arrangements, or eaten before you boarded. We are not a hospital." She gestured to the 2 plates on the cart. "It's the beef or the cod. Otherwise, it's nothing until we land in New York." Her finality was a slap in the face. She saw a problem, not a person. A nuisance in a tracksuit who didn't belong. Henry looked at her, his dark eyes unreadable. The quiet observer in him took over cataloguing the details. The slight tremor of irritation in her hand, the practiced indifference in her gaze, the name Brenda on her tag, the Aerovista Airlines logo on her uniform. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "I see." He said, his voice quiet, but carrying a new weight. "Nothing it is, then. Thank you for your time." He leaned his head back against the seat and closed his eyes, shutting her out. Brenda, feeling victorious, sniffed and pushed her cart down the aisle. Chloe cast one last pained glance at Henry before following her superior. For the next 6 hours, Henry drank only water. He felt the familiar, unwelcome pangs of hunger, but they were overshadowed by a different feeling, a cold, clear sense of purpose. He hadn't sought this confrontation, but now that it had found him, he would see it through to its conclusion. He was Henry Dubois. He had built an empire on taste precision and an unyielding commitment to excellence. Aerovista Airlines and its caterer had failed on all counts, and Brenda, the flight attendant with the tired eyes and sharp tongue, had no idea who she had just starved. The silence from seat 2A was more unnerving than any outburst would have been. As the meal service concluded and the cabin lights dimmed, Henry remained perfectly still. His eyes closed. He wasn't sleeping. He was thinking. He was dissecting the interaction with Brenda, piece by piece, like a complex source, identifying every component of her dismissal. The initial sizing up, the procedural stonewalling, the escalation to condescension, and the final callous ultimatum. It was a masterclass in poor service, colored by an undeniable undercurrent of prejudice. Chloe, the younger flight attendant, felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. She had been with Aerovista for less than a year and was still trying to learn the rhythms of the job. Brenda was her senior, a 20-year veteran who ruled the premium cabins with an iron fist. Questioning her was career suicide. But the man in 2A, there was a dignity in his quiet refusal that troubled her deeply. She found a moment when Brenda was in the galley, complaining to another crew member about the entitled passengers in first class. Chloe quickly grabbed 2 unopened bags of plain pretzels and a bottle of premium water. Heart pounding, she walked to Henry's seat. She knelt slightly to be at his eye level. "Sir," she whispered. Henry's eyes opened. They were clear and focused, and they seemed to look right through her. "Yes, I am so sorry about what happened," she said, her voice barely audible. "I know it's not what you asked for, but I found these. The ingredients are very simple, mostly just flour, water, salt." She offered him the pretzels. I checked. There are no preservatives listed. Henry looked from her earnest, worried face to the packets in her hand. He offered a small, sad smile. "Thank you, Chloe. I appreciate your kindness more than you know." He took the pretzels but didn't open them. Unfortunately, cross-contamination in the processing plants is a risk I can't take. But your gesture, it means a great deal. Thank you. Chloe felt a flush of both relief and failure. Of course. Is there anything else? A hot towel? More water. I'm fine, he said, his voice gentle. You're very good at your job, Chloe. The compliment, so simple and sincere, almost made her cry. She nodded, stood up and retreated to the galley, feeling Brenda's suspicious eyes on her back. What was that about? Brenda demanded, wiping down a counter with aggressive strokes. Just offering him some water, Brenda. Chloe mumbled, avoiding her gaze. Don't waste your time coddling him. He's looking for a handout, a free flight voucher. I've seen his type 1,000,000 times. They fly once on points, dress like they're going to the gym, and act like they own the plane. You give them an inch, they'll take a mile. Chloe didn't argue. She just busied herself rearranging tea bags, the injustice of Brenda's words souring the air. Meanwhile, Henry had taken out his phone. He switched it to airplane mode, but opened his notes app. He began to type his large thumbs, moving with surprising speed and precision. Incident report. Aerovista Flight 723 PR JFK, June 28th. Seat 2A. Lead flight attendant, Brenda G. Per name tag. Issue failure to provide pre-ordered and confirmed medical dietary meal. Timeline. Approx. 13:45 GMT meal service commences. Initial request for special meal made. Attendant Brenda claims no record of order. Tone dismissive. No attempt to verify with ground crew or flight records beyond a cursory tablet check. Second request made emphasizing medical necessity. Alternative fruit, plain bread requested. Attendant Brenda escalates response. Accusatory tone. Implies passenger negligence. Refuses any and all alternatives. Quote, we are not a bespoke restaurant. Quote, if your condition is that severe, perhaps you should have made more robust arrangements. Final ultimatum. Standard meal or nothing. Witness junior flight attendant, Chloe. Demonstrated empathy and attempted to de-escalate, provide alternative. Professional conduct commendable. Observation. The core issue is not a simple catering error, which can happen. The issue is the institutional response. The complete lack of problem-solving, the absence of empathy, and the default to dismissive and accusatory language. This points to a systemic failure in training and service culture. He paused his typing. Service culture. That was the heart of it. A meal was more than sustenance. It was an act of hospitality. On an airplane, it was one of the few tangible metrics of care a company could provide. The food served was a direct reflection of the airline's values, and the food served by its catering partner, Global Fare Inc., was currently under his microscope for a $70 million contract renewal. Henry had been chosen as the anonymous tie-breaking judge for the Aerovista catering contract. For the past 6 months, he'd been flying different routes, sampling meals in every class, evaluating everything from the freshness of the salad greens in economy to the complexity of the wine pairings in first. The final stage was this week, a formal presentation by the 2 competing caterers at Aerovista's New York headquarters. He was the mystery culinary consultant. His mind replayed Brenda's words. The catering for this flight was loaded in Paris. Global Fare. He knew their work intimately now. Inconsistent. Sometimes brilliant, often mediocre. But this was a new low. It wasn't about the food itself, but the system that delivered it. A system that could allow a confirmed medical order to simply vanish. A system that empowered an employee like Brenda to treat a customer with such disdain, with no fear of repercussions. He closed his eyes again, the dull ache of hunger, now a low thrum in the background of his thoughts. The silence he projected was a carefully constructed shield. Behind it, a judge was deliberating, and the evidence being presented was damning. While Henry Dubois sat hungry in the sky, Mark Gable was pacing the beige carpet of his living room in a quiet suburb of Long Island. The house was a little too big for them, the mortgage a little too high, a fact that had been a constant source of low-grade anxiety for the past 5 years. Mark was the director of client relations for Global Fare Inc., and the Aerovista Airlines contract was his entire world. "He's on the flight right now," Mark said, running a hand through his thinning hair. The final data point. He's flying Paris to JFK first class, tasting our premier international service. His wife Brenda was at the kitchen counter sorting through mail. She'd just gotten home from her 4-day rotation, and the exhaustion was etched onto her face, making her look older than her 49 years. "Which flight?" she asked, her voice distracted as she slit open a credit card bill. AV-123. "Lands in about an hour," Mark said. "I swear I haven't slept properly in a week." Lawrence is losing his mind. Lawrence Vance was the CEO of Global Fare, a slick, hard-driving executive who saw employees as assets on a balance sheet. Losing the Aerovista contract, their flagship account, was unthinkable. It wasn't just $70 million. It was their reputation. "It'll be fine, Mark," Brenda said, her tone lacking any real conviction. She tossed the bill onto a growing pile. "Our Paris kitchen is one of the best. The first-class menu is solid. Beef bourguignon, that seared cod. It's good food. It's not just about the food, Bren. You know that. It's about the experience, the presentation, the wow factor. And this judge, he's a ghost. All we know are his initials. DD Aerovista is keeping his identity locked down tighter than Fort Knox. They say he's a culinary legend, a real purist. Someone who can tell if a scallop was frozen just by the texture. Mark shuddered. That's the kind of person we're dealing with. Honestly, these so-called purists are the worst, Brenda scoffed, finally looking up from the mail. Her face was set in a familiar mask of weary cynicism. I had one today, in fact, on that exact flight 723. Some guy in a tracksuit, probably flying on his buddy's air miles, demanding some special meal that didn't exist. Said it was medical. She made air quotes with her fingers. Please, if you're that delicate, maybe you should fly private. Mark stopped pacing. A flicker of unease went through him. First class. What did he look like? I don't know Mark. Big guy. Black. Quiet. Just sat there looking martyred after I told him no. Honestly, the nerve of some people. I had to serve 20 other passengers, and he wanted me to go on a scavenger hunt for a piece of plain chicken. She shook her head, the memory clearly still irritating her. I told him it was the cod or the beef. He chose to pout for 6 hours instead. Mark stared at her, a strange, cold feeling creeping up his spine. Wait, you refused him a meal? He refused our meal, Brenda corrected sharply. There was no special order on my manifest. My job is to follow the manifest. You know the protocols. No manifest, no meal. It prevents fraud people trying to get a custom dish just because they feel like it. But Brenda, if he said it was medical, they all say it's medical. She snapped, her fatigue and stress boiling over. It's the magic word to get what they want. I'm so sick of it. Sick of the entitlement. Sick of the constant demands. Do you have any idea what it's like up there? The pressure, all while our pay is frozen and they're threatening to cut our benefits. The conversation was veering into their usual territory. Her job stress, his job stress, and the mountain of bills on the counter. Mark let it go, but the image of the man she described lingered in his mind. A purist. A ghost. DD. He shook his head. No. It was impossible. A coincidence. The world was big. The chances were astronomical. A culinary legend wouldn't be flying in a tracksuit. He'd be in an Armani suit, demanding champagne and caviar. Brenda was right. It was just some chancer. The doorbell rang, startling them both. It was a courier with a heavy sealed document portfolio from Aerovista. Mark signed for it, his hand trembling slightly. It's the final briefing for the presentation tomorrow, he said, his voice hushed. The judge's flight has landed. His initial report is probably in here. He carefully broke the seal and pulled out a single sheet of paper from a thick binder of logistical information. It was a memo from Arthur Finch, the CEO of Aerovista Airlines. To finalist catering teams. From Arthur Finch, CEO Aerovista Airlines. Re-final presentation assessment. Please be advised that our consultant has completed his final in-flight evaluation. His feedback will form a significant part of the deliberation process. The final presentation will take place tomorrow, June 29th, at 10:00 a.m. sharp in the Aerovista Executive Boardroom. The assessing committee will be led by myself and the board. Our consultant, who has remained anonymous until now, for the integrity of the process, will also be in attendance to ask questions and provide his final verdict. We look forward to seeing your presentation. We are pleased to introduce our consultant, Chef Henry Dubois. Mark read the name, and his blood ran cold. Dubois. DD. He knew that name. Everyone in the food world knew that name. Henry Dubois, the Creole king, the saint of sauces, the Michelin-starred genius from New Orleans who had built a global restaurant empire from his grandmother's recipes, a legend, a purist, and a black man. He looked up from the page, his eyes wide, with a dawning, sickening horror. He looked at his wife, Brenda, who was now complaining about the cost of their daughter's college textbooks. "Bren," he whispered, his voice cracking. "The man on the plane today. In the tracksuit. What about him?" she asked, annoyed at the interruption. Mark held up the memo, his hand shaking so badly the paper rattled. "His name. Was it Dubois?" Brenda's face went blank. The name echoed faintly a detail from the manifest she had barely glanced at. Dubois, D-U-B-O-I-S. The name the passenger had calmly spelled out for her. Her mouth went dry. The color drained from her face as the pieces clicked into place with the sickening finality of a coffin lid shutting. The tracksuit. The quiet dignity, the refusal to make a scene, the medical request that wasn't a fussy preference, but a genuine necessity for a man whose entire career depended on his health and his palate. "Oh my God," Brenda whispered, collapsing onto a kitchen chair. "Mark, what have I done?" The pile of bills on the counter suddenly seemed insignificant. They were staring into a much deeper, much darker abyss. One she had opened with 2 words. "It's nothing." The silence in the Gable household was absolute, broken only by the frantic pounding of 2 hearts. The memo with Henry Dubois' name lay on the kitchen table like a death certificate for their careers. Mark was the first to speak, his voice a strangled rasp. "Tell me everything, Brenda. Every single word you said to him. Don't leave anything out." Brenda, pale and trembling, recounted the entire exchange. With the benefit of hindsight, her own words sounded horrifyingly callous, her condescension breathtakingly arrogant. The air quotes around the word medical, the jab about not being a bespoke restaurant, the final dismissive ultimatum. Each detail was another nail in the coffin. "I thought he was a nobody," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "He was just sitting there so plainly. I judged him Mark. I looked at him, and I made an assumption. A horrible, stupid assumption. Mark's mind was racing a chaotic whirlwind of damage control scenarios, each one more futile than the last. Did he seem angry? Did he yell? Threaten to complain? No. Brenda choked out, which was somehow worse. That's the thing. He was calm. He was perfectly calm. He just looked at me, and then he closed his eyes. It was like he was studying me. A wave of nausea washed over Mark. He wasn't just a passenger. He was a judge. He wasn't just being difficult. He was testing their systems, and they had failed spectacularly. His wife hadn't just been rude to a customer. She had insulted the one man who held their $70 million contract, and by extension, Mark's entire career in the palm of his hand. His phone buzzed. It was Lawrence Vance, the CEO of Global Fare. Mark's finger hovered over the screen before he answered, trying to compose his voice. "Mark, did you get the memo? Henry Dubois? Can you believe it? What a coup for us. The man is a god. If he likes our food, we're not just renewed, we're legends." Lawrence's voice was electric with excitement. "Yeah, Lawrence, I got it. It's big news." Mark managed to say, his throat tight. "Big. It's monumental. The team is ecstatic. We're running through the presentation one last time. I'm having them add a slide about our commitment to sourcing authentic ingredients, play right into his Creole heritage. This is it, Mark. The finish line. Lawrence, there might be a problem. Mark began, his voice barely a whisper. A problem? What problem? The food is flawless. The logistics are tight. What could possibly be a problem? Mark looked at his wife's tear-streaked face. How could he possibly explain this? My wife, a flight attendant for the airline we're trying to woo, may have just starved your star judge on his final evaluation flight. It was career suicide. It was corporate seppuku. It's nothing. Mark lied, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Just pre-game jitters. You're right. We're ready. Damn right we are. See you at 0800 tomorrow for the final prep. Don't be late. Lawrence hung up. Mark dropped the phone on the counter. He felt trapped, suffocated. He had lied to his boss, and in less than 12 hours that lie would be exposed in the most humiliating way possible. You have to call him Brenda, said her voice, desperate. Call the airline. Explain it was a misunderstanding. Apologize. Apologize for what Brenda Mark's voice rose, cracking with panic and fury. Apologize for my wife profiling a passenger, for her denying a medical request, because she decided he didn't look the part. There's no corporate script for that. Do you know what this means? This isn't just about the contract anymore. This is a story. Aero Vista flight attendant refuses to serve black celebrity chef. It'll be on every blog, every news site before we even get her fired. He started pacing again, his movements frantic. Our house, Brenda, our daughter's tuition, my entire career. I've spent 15 years at Global Fare, kissing up to guys like Lawrence, working 60-hour weeks, missing birthdays. For what? For you to throw it all away because you couldn't be bothered to check a manifest properly. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and cruel. Brenda flinched as if struck. It wasn't just about not checking, she cried, a surge of defensive anger rising through her fear. The system is a mess. The orders are wrong half the time. We're overworked, underpaid, and treated like dirt by the passengers and the company. I'm exhausted, Mark. I'm not a monster. I'm just a woman who has been pushed to her limit for years. And today, I made a terrible, terrible mistake. A mistake. He laughed, a harsh, broken sound. A mistake is forgetting to put sugar in someone's coffee. This was a character flaw on public display, Brenda. You saw a black man in a tracksuit, and you wrote him off. Admit it. The brutal truth of his words silenced her. All her excuses about stress and system failures crumbled, revealing the ugly foundation beneath. The prejudice she'd never admit she had, the shortcuts she took when she thought no one important was watching. The fight drained out of them, replaced by a cold, shared dread. They sat in their beautiful kitchen in their too expensive house like strangers trapped together in a sinking ship. There was no solution. There was no escape. All they could do was wait for the morning when the man his wife had dismissed as a nobody would sit in judgment of their entire world. Mark went into his home office and stared at the presentation slides on his laptop. Global Fare, a culture of excellence, unwavering attention to detail, every passenger, a valued guest. The corporate slogans mocked him, hollow lies that were about to be spectacularly exposed. He knew he wouldn't sleep. It would be the longest night of his life, a dark, agonizing countdown to his professional execution. The Aerovista executive boardroom was a symphony of corporate power. A long, polished mahogany table reflected the recessed lighting above. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the New York City skyline, a vista of ambition and success. For Mark Gable, it felt like the world's most expensive execution chamber. He stood beside his boss, Lawrence Vance, both of them dressed in immaculate dark suits. Their presentation was loaded onto the large screen at the end of the room. Mark felt a cold sweat prickle his skin, his tie suddenly feeling like a noose. Lawrence, oblivious, was buzzing with confidence. "Look at this room, Mark," Lawrence whispered, clapping him on the shoulder. "This is where it happens. By noon, we'll be popping champagne." Mark could only manage a weak, sickly smile. He had confessed nothing. Cowardice had kept him silent, and now he was a condemned man, walking his own green mile. The door opened, and Arthur Finch, the CEO of Aerovista, entered. He was a tall, silver-haired man with an air of unflappable authority. He greeted Lawrence with a firm handshake. "Lawrence, good to see you." "Your team is ready?" Finch asked, his eyes scanning them both. "More than ready." "Arthur." "We're excited to show you the future of in-flight dining," Lawrence boomed. "Excellent," Finch said, his expression unreadable. He gestured towards the door. "Our consultant has just arrived. He's been debriefing with my team about his final flight experience." Mark's heart hammered against his ribs. Debriefing. The word sounded ominous, clinical. The door opened again, and Henry Dubois walked in. He was no longer the anonymous man in a tracksuit. Today he was dressed in a bespoke charcoal grey suit that fit his large frame perfectly. He wore no tie, the top button of his crisp white shirt undone, an accent of effortless style. He moved with a silent, commanding presence that instantly dwarfed everyone else in the room. His eyes, calm and intelligent, swept over the space before landing on the global fare team. Lawrence Vance stepped forward, his hand outstretched, a predatory grin on his face. "Chef Dubois, Lawrence Vance, CEO of Global Fare. It is an absolute honor. I've followed your career for years. A true visionary." Henry took his hand, his grip firm. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice the same low, smooth baritone Mark's wife had described. Then Henry's eyes moved past Lawrence and settled on Mark. For a terrifying second, the world seemed to stop. There was no flicker of anger in Henry's expression, no hint of a grudge. There was only a calm, penetrating look of recognition. He saw Mark, and in that instant, Mark knew that Henry saw everything: the panicked husband, the complicit employee, the man whose boss had belittled him just hours before. The tracksuit was gone, but the man was the same, and his memory was clearly perfect. Mark felt the blood drain from his face. He felt dizzy, his meticulously rehearsed presentation lines vanishing from his mind, replaced by the sound of his wife's voice. "I told him it was the cod or the beef." He chose to pout. Lawrence, noticing Mark's frozen state, nudged him forward. "And this is my director of client relations, Mark Gable. Mark has been the driving force behind our partnership with Aerovista." Mark forced his legs to move. He extended a clammy, trembling hand. "Chef Dubois." An honor." Henry took his hand. His touch was cool and dry. He held Mark's gaze for just a moment longer than necessary. "Mr. Gable," he acknowledged, his voice perfectly neutral. The simple utterance of his name was an indictment. In that moment, Henry wasn't just acknowledging him. He was confirming their shared unspoken secret. He was letting Mark know that he knew. They all took their seats. Henry sat directly opposite Mark next to Arthur Finch. The presentation began. It was a complete and utter disaster. Lawrence, full of bluster, launched into his speech, clicking through slides filled with corporate jargon. Synergistic culinary partnerships, hyper-local sourcing models, a paradigm of passenger-centric service. Mark was supposed to handle the second half, the part about service implementation and quality control. When his cue came, he stood up, his legs feeling like jelly. He opened his mouth, but the words wouldn't come. He stared at Henry Dubois, whose face was a mask of polite professional interest, yet whose eyes seemed to pierce right through him. Mark's mind was a blank slate. All he could see was the chain of events, Brenda's dismissive sneer, the uneaten meal, the memo on his kitchen table, the lie to his boss, and now the calm, judgmental gaze of the man who held their fate in his hands. Mark Lawrence prompted an edge of irritation in his voice. Mark stammered, fumbling his notes. At Global Fare, we believe that every passenger—" He trailed off, his voice cracking. He glanced at the title on the slide behind him. Unwavering attention to detail. He felt a wave of self-loathing so intense it almost buckled his knees. He was a fraud standing here trying to sell a lie to the very man who had experienced the ugliest truth of their operation. He looked at Henry, then at Arthur Finch. He couldn't do it. I'm sorry, he mumbled, and sat down, burying his face in his hands. The boardroom was filled with a stunned, heavy silence. Lawrence Vance stared at him, his face a mixture of fury and disbelief. Arthur Finch raised a single, quizzical eyebrow, and Henry Dubois just watched his expression unchanged as the $70 million presentation imploded before it had even truly begun. The judgment was already happening not with words, but with a crushing, unbearable silence. The silence in the boardroom stretched for an agonizingly long time. Lawrence Vance, after a moment of frozen shock, tried to recover. He leaped to his feet and attempted to take over Mark's part of the presentation, but the damage was done. His words sounded hollow and desperate, the smooth corporate pitch ruined by the raw, unprofessional display of Mark's breakdown. When Lawrence finally mercifully finished, Arthur Finch turned to Henry. "Chef Dubois, do you have any questions for the Global Fare team?" Henry leaned forward, slightly, placing his hands on the mahogany table. He didn't look at the presentation screen or the binders full of data. He looked directly at Lawrence, but his questions felt aimed at the entire company's ethos. Mr. Vance Henry began, his voice calm and measured. "Your presentation speaks of a passenger-centric service model. Could you elaborate on your protocols for when things go wrong? For instance, when a pre-confirmed order is not on the manifest." "What is the procedure?" Lawrence, sweating, now launched into a jargon-filled explanation. "Our protocols are robust, Chef. There's a multi-point verification system. In the unlikely event of a discrepancy, our partners in the cabin crew are empowered to consult the digital manifest, and—" Henry held up a hand, gently cutting him off. "Let me be more specific. What is the protocol for a special dietary meal of a medical nature? If the meal is missing, what happens next? What is the fail-safe to ensure the passenger's health and safety are not compromised?" Mark could feel the question like a physical blow. It was his wife's failure, his company's failure being dissected with surgical precision. Lawrence stammered. "Well, the primary responsibility there lies with the airline crew to action, but our catering is loaded with contingencies. He was clearly improvising, and it was painfully obvious. I see Henry said a universe of meaning in those two simple words. He turned his attention to the food samples that had been laid out, a beautiful spread of the exact dishes served on his flight. The beef bourguignon, the pan-seared cod. He picked up a fork not to taste, but to inspect. He nudged a piece of the beef. "Your sourcing is admirable." Henry noted his eyes scanning the dish. But excellence isn't just about the quality of the ingredients. It's about consistency. It's about the culture that delivers the food to the passenger. A culture of care, of respect. A culture that sees every single passenger, regardless of their appearance or the ticket they hold as a guest, to be honored. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart. He wasn't just talking about food anymore. He was talking about Brenda. He was talking about the assumptions she made. He put the fork down without taking a single bite. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Vance." "Mr. Gable," Henry said, turning to Arthur Finch. "I believe I have everything I need." It was the most comprehensive rejection imaginable. He hadn't even needed to taste the food. The service had already left a bad taste in his mouth. The meeting was over. Arthur Finch gave them a curt, dismissive nod. "We'll be in touch." As they packed up their briefcases in a humiliated silence, Mark felt a hand on his arm. He turned to see Henry Dubois standing beside him. Lawrence had already stormed out of the room. "Mr. Gable," Henry said, his voice low, so only Mark could hear. "A word, please." They stood in a corner of the now empty boardroom. Mark couldn't meet his eyes. He just stared at the knot of Henry's perfectly tailored suit. "I want to apologize," Chef Mark whispered, his voice thick with shame. "What happened on that flight? There is no excuse. It was unprofessional, unacceptable, and I am so deeply sorry. Your wife made a mistake," Henry said, his voice devoid of malice, but full of a steely gravity. A mistake born from poor training, a toxic work culture, and a casual prejudice that people in service should never possess. But you, Mr. Gable, made a choice. You knew what had happened. You knew your company's promises of excellence were a lie, and you chose to come in here and sell that lie to my face. Mark flinched. The truth was brutal. You chose to protect a broken system instead of addressing the failure. Henry continued. You chose to protect your position over your integrity. Global Fare is losing this contract, not just because your flight attendant failed to serve me a meal. It's losing because your director of client relations proved that the company's leadership is just as broken as its service. From the doorway, Arthur Finch watched them, having lingered to witness the exchange. "My wife. She's not a bad person." Mark pleaded, a desperate final attempt to salvage some shred of his life. "She's just stressed. We're in debt. She's scared of losing her job. It's not an excuse, I know, but it's the truth." Henry was silent for a moment, his gaze unwavering. "Everyone has pressures, Mr. Gable. Everyone is scared of something. But you don't get a pass on basic human decency because you're having a bad day or a bad year. Integrity is what you do when no one important is watching, or when you think no one important is watching." He straightened his suit jacket. "The world is built on service. The farmer who grows the food, the trucker who drives it, the cook who prepares it, the attendant who serves it. It's a chain of trust. Your wife broke a link. You tried to sell me the broken chain. My judgment is not personal. It is professional. And it is final." With a final brief nod, Henry Dubois turned and walked away, leaving Mark Gable alone in the boardroom with the ghost of his career and the devastating consequences of a single, terrible assumption. Arthur Finch walked over, his expression grim. "Mark," the CEO said, his voice cold as ice, "I think it's best you clear out your desk at Global Fare. I'll be having a word with Lawrence. Your brand is officially toxic." The fallout was not a gentle descent. It was a cliff dive onto jagged rocks. Before Mark had even collected his briefcase from the boardroom floor, Lawrence Vance was on the phone with Global Fare's HR department. The official termination meeting was a perfunctory 5-minute affair in a soulless office near the lobby. Lawrence didn't even attend, sending a subordinate to deliver the news. Gross professional negligence, misrepresentation of company values, and failure to perform assigned duties, the HR manager read from a script, refusing to make eye contact. Mark was handed a box for his personal effects and was escorted from the building by a security guard, a final galling humiliation that burned itself into his memory. The 15 years he had dedicated to the company had been erased in less than an hour. The drive back to Long Island was a surreal journey through a world that no longer felt like his. The familiar landscape of manicured lawns and stately homes seemed alien, a life he was now looking at through thick, soundproof glass. He replayed Henry Dubois's words over and over in his mind. "You chose to protect a broken system. You chose to protect your position over your integrity." It wasn't an accusation. It was a diagnosis. And it was true. When he pulled into the driveway, Brenda was waiting by the door. She must have seen his car. Her face was ashen. She had gotten a text from Chloe. A simple, terrified message. "The whole airline is buzzing. They say the Global Fare contract is dead. Are you okay?" Mark walked in, dropped his briefcase and the pathetic little ponks of his belongings on the floor, and simply said, "He fired me." There was no fight. The anger that had fueled them the night before had been incinerated by the stark reality of their ruin. They sat at the kitchen table, the polished granite cool beneath their trembling hands. For the first time, there were no deflections, no excuses, just the gaping void of their failure. "Tell me what he said to you, Brenda," whispered her voice, hoarse. "After the meeting, Mr. Dubois." Mark recounted the conversation, sparing himself nothing. He repeated the devastating assessment of his own character, the choice he had made to sell a lie rather than own a mistake. As he spoke, he saw a new layer of pain cross Brenda's face. Her mistake had been the spark, but his moral cowardice had been the gasoline that made the whole structure explode. Her actions had put him in a terrible position, but he was the one who had failed the test. "I'm the one who did this to you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "My stupid, ugly pride." No, Bren, Mark said, a surprising clarity cutting through his despair. "You started it." "But I finished it. I could have told Lawrence the truth last night. I could have walked into that boardroom and been honest. I didn't. I was a coward." Dubois was right. That confession that shared ownership of their downfall changed the air in the room. It was no longer about blame. It was about a mutual reckoning. They talked for hours, excavating the rotting foundations of their life. They spoke of the pressure to maintain the big house, the nice cars, the expensive vacations, a lifestyle built on a mountain of debt and stress. They realized their pursuit of success had hollowed them out, leaving them brittle and unprepared for a true crisis. The next morning, Brenda sat at the same table and wrote her letter of resignation. She didn't mention the incident, only that after 20 years of service, she was moving on. turning in her uniform and ID badge, felt less like a defeat and more like a surrender. The weight of the crisp blue suit was gone, but she felt terrifyingly unmoored without it. The weeks that followed were a painful education in humility. The for sale sign hammered into their perfect lawn felt like a public declaration of their failure. Mark spent his days scrolling through job sites, his impressive resume now feeling like a work of fiction. The director-level positions he was qualified for were out of the question. The news of the Aerovista debacle had traveled fast in their industry. He was toxic. He started applying for mid-level logistics jobs, his stomach churning with every cover letter he wrote. The most difficult moment came when they had to call their daughter a sophomore at NYU. Explaining that her college fund was gone, that she would have to apply for significant loans or consider transferring to a state school, was the most painful conversation of Mark's life. The disappointment in her voice was a fresh wound, a direct consequence of their choices. They were at their lowest ebb a month later. The house had a low-ball offer they were about to accept. Their savings were dwindling at an alarming rate. They were eating pasta with canned sauce for dinner, the silence heavy with unspoken fear. It was on one of these bleak, rainy afternoons that the envelope arrived. It was heavy, made of elegant cream cardstock, with Mark Gable written on the front in a confident, flowing script. There was no return address. "It's from a law firm," Brenda said, her voice tight with fear. "They're going to sue us." "Let them," Mark said wearily, his capacity for shock exhausted. He slit it open with a kitchen knife, his hand unsteady. Inside was not a legal document, but a single, thick card. At the top, an embossed logo, Le Coeur Créole. Beneath it, a message. Mark read it aloud, his voice gaining a disbelieving strength with each word. "Mr. Gable enclosed is a recipe. It belonged to my grandmother, Elodie. It is for a simple restorative chicken soup. The ingredients are humble, but if prepared with care and attention, the result is nourishing. It is food for when you are at your lowest and need to rebuild from the basics. My grandmother used to say, the best meals don't come from the richest ingredients, they come from the most honest hands. I have a new distribution center opening in New Jersey in 6 months. It needs a logistics manager. The job is about details process and ensuring that what is promised is what is delivered. It is about rebuilding a broken chain of trust, one link at a time. The salary is a fraction of what you are used to. The work is demanding, and you would start at the very bottom. You would report to people half your age. If you are interested in applying, you will know where to find me. The first interview question will be about how to properly dice an onion. Your apology in the boardroom was for your job. If you show up for this one, it will be for your integrity. Sincerely, Henry Dubois. Tucked behind the letter was a beautifully handwritten recipe card, Grand-mère Elodie's poulet de guérison, Grandmother Elodie's healing chicken. They stared at the letter speechless. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't charity. It was a challenge wrapped in an act of profound, unexpected grace. It was a lifeline thrown not to the slick executive but to the broken man. He's offering you a job. Brenda breathed, tears welling in her eyes, for a different reason this time. No, Mark said slowly, understanding the depth of the offer. He's offering me a chance to see if I'm worth hiring. He's offering me a path back, a hard one. The humility of it was staggering. To work for Henry Dubois, to be judged every day on his own merits, with no corporate buffer to hide behind. To accept a junior role, a massive pay cut, to truly start over. It was terrifying. And for the first time in months, Mark felt a flicker not of hope, but of purpose. He stood up and walked over to the pantry. He rummaged for a moment before pulling out a dusty bag of yellow onions. He placed one on the cutting board. Brenda watched him, her breath held. Mark Gable, the former director of client relations, picked up a kitchen knife. He looked at the onion, then at the recipe card, his eyes tracing the elegant handwriting. He took a deep, steadying breath. Then, with a focus he hadn't felt in years, he made the first cut. It was a small, simple action, but for him it was everything. It was the first honest ingredient in a new life he would have to build from scratch. This story is a powerful reminder that our actions, even the ones we think are small and insignificant, can create ripples we can never imagine. Brenda's split-second judgment, born from stress and a deep-seated prejudice, didn't just cost her husband a contract. It unraveled their entire lives. It serves as a stark warning about the danger of assumptions and the true meaning of service and respect. But it's also a story of redemption. Henry Dubois didn't just punish them. He offered a path forward, a difficult road paved with humility and hard work. He offered a chance not just to earn a living, but to reclaim their integrity. What do you think of Henry's offer? Was it too generous? Or was it the ultimate lesson? What would you have done in Mark's or Brenda's shoes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more real-life drama that makes you think. Thank you for listening.